This is Nitin Dahad with EE Times. I'm talking today to Stan Boland here at the Global Semiconductor Conference in Malta. Stan, hello.
Hi, Nitin.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Stan is a angel investor and serial entrepreneur based in the UK, but I think he's done some, he's done various global businesses. Stan, tell me a little bit about what you've said here at the conference, because you gave quite a good opening speech.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so Silicon Catalyst asked me to give like a half-hour talk, really, in terms of what we should be doing to kind of build the next generation of unicorns and decacorns, maybe centacorns in the future.
Right.
So I started really with looking at, well, how is Europe doing in the semiconductor space, and where not just are the revenues, but where is the value being created?
Right.
So the talk is really centered on the facts, and then what we might learn from it, what we might do next, actually.
Yeah, I was looking through the slides again this morning, and I think you talk a lot about value creation and how that's not the same as,
that's right,
as revenue. So yeah. I think just talk us through the steps up to that.
Yeah, so the amazing thing is that the semiconductor industry is like growing incredibly strongly. So the numbers I add up is about 683 billion a year of revenue in the sector, which is actually slightly more than all the analyst reports. So I'm not quite sure. I may have slightly double counted something, but it's of that order. But more importantly than that is the total amount of value that's been created, or wealth, if you like, has been created. And actually, we really care about wealth more than we care about like revenue. And the amount of wealth that's been created in the semiconductor space globally is about 7.4 trillion, which is phenomenal. So I was kind of drawing the comparison between how that looks from a European perspective and how it looks from a US perspective. And one of the things I thought was quite interesting is that in the US, the wealth created per person in the US is about $17,000 a head. In Europe, it's about $1,000 a head.
I mean, you talk about that. Is that tech, those figures, or is that sort of broadly?
Well, that's semiconductors.
Oh, semiconductors.
That's
okay.
just semiconductors, yeah. So just in the semiconductor space,
yeah.
It's 7.4 trillion is the total wealth that's been created over the last several decades. And so I was trying to look at, well, where's that been created? Not only what kind of companies it's been created in, but also geographically how that's distributed. And there's a few kind of really important lessons I think we can kind of draw from that analysis. So one is that the majority of the wealth has really been created in the fabless model.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's something like 77% of all the wealth that's been created in chips is in the fabless space, which is a kind of staggering number actually. And if you look at the second biggest sector that's created wealth, it's foundries, dominated by TSMC. So I mean, way dominated by TSMC, and the other sectors, although they may account for quite a lot of revenue, actually have not been valued and are not creating the same amount of wealth, and it's kind of counter to how we might currently be investing in the chip space. So, which is kind of a bit of an odd situation.
You alluded to it, but I think Malcolm Penn also sort of actually spelt it out in his presentation, which is, it's not about fab capacity. It's about investing in, and I think you said that in your presentation as well. Which is it's about putting it in that fabless space, for example, in terms of investment.
That's right.
So I think it's not just more capacity we need.
That's right. And if you look at the kind of regional distribution, it turns out that Europe can only really see from space, if you like, 6 companies that have really created wealth. One is ASML, which is obviously a foundry equipment lithographic company, but it is the biggest company basically that's centered here in Europe. ARM is the second, although arguably it's a Japanese company now.
Yes. Yes.
And then we have the sort of 3...
Japanese listed on NASDAQ.
Japanese listed on NASDAQ, yeah. And then we got like 3 sort of classic companies, the traditional IDMs here, so NXP, Infineon and ST.
Yes.
And then, and actually ASM is the 6th company, which is the original parent really. So you've got these 6 companies that are kind of visible. Everything else is like, you just can't basically see it. Whereas and there is nobody in the fabless space that is kind of visible from space either. So one of the lessons I was trying to draw out is that if we're thinking about where we should be investing, we really need to be investing in design companies that are going to build new companies in the fabless space, leveraging the foundry model. And that maybe the sequencing of how we're thinking about this in Europe isn't quite right, really.
Right.
And that putting a lot of money into foundry and building capacity is the tail trying to wag the dog, really.
Yeah.
And that we'd be much better off building companies that are designing compelling products using a fabless model. And then if and when we get to the point where the revenues of those companies are driving such capacity demands, it makes sense to bring that into Europe. That would be the point to talk about building fab capacity here. And it does feel like a lot of the thinking seems to be the wrong way around in Europe, actually.
And I think that's why you're involved very heavily in the UK in terms of developing some of that policy along with Silicon Catalyst and various TechWorks and others.
That's right. So we're trying to basically advocate for some policy changes, because Europe represents now, I think, 8% of the entire wealth in the chip space is being created by European companies. So 8% in a region of 535 million people, with probably twice as many electronics engineers we generate every year in Europe versus the US is insane. I mean, it's an insane underperformance. And the quicker we take a step back and realize the mistakes we're making, the better. So one is the sort of general shape of investment. The second thing I've been trying to draw out is kind of government policy and how across the whole of Europe, including the UK actually, government policy has been far too skewed towards kind of passive investment, if you like, helicopter money that arrives. You just prove you've spent money on R&D, and this subsidy arrives from government
a tick box
to pay for it, with no quality test about is this actually building companies that are going to win in the marketplace or not, as opposed to the US system, where things like tax credits are much lower, but actually the amount of venture capital is much higher. And trying to create the arguments for saying, why don't we change policy so that we have significantly more money going into venture, and compensating for that, we could have significantly less going into helicopter.
Well, they did try that with the British Venture Capital Fund or something like that, but I think that wasn't maybe well publicised.
Yeah, if you take the UK, for example, UK it does invest about 600 million a year into fund of funds, into venture in the UK, and a very small fraction of that does go into semiconductors.
Okay.
But in pretty much all European cases, you could multiply that number by a factor of 5 or 6, and you're starting to get to the numbers that we actually need to turn the ship around. And you look at the amount we're actually spending on passive investment, things like tax credits and grants and so on. Those numbers are massive, and it would be quite easy to turn some of that money into fund of funds that would actually create a much more red-meated, sort of full-throated American type model, and we would for sure get similar results actually. And so I'm kind of arguing that Europe, wake up. We've got to change policy, and the time to do it is now at this kind of dawn of AI. We've got all these opportunities. If we don't do it, we're going to that 8% is going to be 4%.
Well, I think I'm going to be talking to you more on that over coming months, because we had a discussion on that. But what's your key takeaway from this conference, would you say, as you, Stan Boland?
Well, I was quite impressed, to be honest, with the conference and the openness to ideas. So it's been quite interesting having the opportunity to kind of put down these markers and see people reflect on it and what their reaction was. And so I give, as you say very kindly, I gave this talk yesterday, just before lunch, and apparently at lunch everybody's talking about this whole issue. And I think it's surprisingly strong acceptance of the fact that we've got to change policy, and the sooner we do it, the better. So it's a really encouraging start, where lots of people are thinking, actually, this sounds right, and we need to be getting on and doing this really. So I thought it was good.
Well, good. Well, Stan, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.